They said Senator Caleb Sterling was married to his job. They said his heart was made of the same cold stone as the monuments in Washington. But they didn't know about the secret hidden at the bottom of his estate, or the woman who was about to bring his carefully constructed walls crashing down. The late October sun did not just set over the Sterling estate, it surrendered. It was a slow, golden fade that set the Virginia hills on fire, turning the maples into torches of crimson and the oaks into pillars of bronze. The air was crisp, smelling of wood smoke and the rich, decaying perfume of fallen leaves, a scent that signaled the end of things, but also the promise of rest. The main house stood at the top of a hill, a sprawling Georgian masterpiece of red brick and white columns. It was a monument to power, a place where treaties had been whispered in the library and laws debated over crystal glasses. It was magnificent, imposing, and utterly cold. But down the gravel path, past the formal hedges and the stone fountain, stood the guest house. It was a small, cottage-style structure covered in ivy that was currently turning a deep, bruised purple. This was where Honey lived. At 29, Honey was the estate's resident horticulturist. She was not a servant in the traditional sense, nor was she family. She occupied the space between the two, a woman whose hands were always stained with the soil of the Sterling land. She wore a thick wool sweater the color of oatmeal and heavy work boots that had seen better days. Her hair, the color of spun copper, was pulled back in a loose, messy braid that defied the rigid geometry of the garden she maintained. Honey was on her knees in the flower bed near the guest house porch, burying tulip bulbs into the cooling earth. It was an act of faith. She was planting promises for a spring she might not even be here to see. She worked with a quiet, rhythmic efficiency, finding solace in the dirt. The soil didn't care about politics. It didn't care about polls or public image. It only cared about what was true: water, light, and roots. We build walls to protect our legacy, never realizing that the roots of true happiness are quietly growing on the other side. The sound of tires crushing gravel broke the silence. Honey didn't look up immediately. She knew the sound. It was the heavy, armored purr of the black SUV that carried the weight of the state. Caleb Sterling had returned. Caleb was 42, a United States Senator known for his ironclad integrity and his stoic, almost impenetrable demeanor. He stepped out of the car near the main house, dismissing his security detail with a sharp nod. He stood there for a moment, adjusting his cufflinks. He looked at the main house, the dark windows staring back at him like a museum of memories he visited but no longer truly inhabited. Instead of going inside the empty mansion, Caleb turned. He began to walk down the path toward the gardens. He needed to breathe air that hadn't been recycled through the ventilation systems of the Capitol. Honey sensed him before she saw him. It was a shift in the atmosphere, a sudden density in the air. She sat back on her heels, wiping her forehead with the back of her wrist. "Senator," she said softly, her voice carrying the rough, warm texture of the earth she tended. Caleb stopped at the edge of the flower bed. He looked down at her. He didn't look like a man who had just brokered a trade deal. He looked like a man who was thirsty. "Honey," he replied. His voice was deep, resonant, the kind of voice that calmed crowded rooms. "I thought the planting season was over." "The frost is coming tonight," Honey explained, picking up another bulb. "If I don't get these in the ground now, they won't bloom in April." It's a race against the cold. Caleb watched her hands. They were rough, strong, capable. They were so different from the manicured hands he shook all day. "A race against the cold," Caleb repeated, looking up at the darkening sky. "That feels like a summary of my entire life lately." It was a rare admission. Caleb Sterling did not complain. But there was something about Honey, something about the way she sat in the dirt, that pulled the truth out of him. "The cold is necessary, Caleb," she said, using his first name. A transgression they allowed only here, in the shadow of the trees. It forces the roots to go deeper. Without the winter, the flower is weak. She looked up at him then. Her eyes were a warm hazel, speckled with gold. They held a wisdom that didn't come from books. Caleb felt a tightness in his chest loosen. He stood on the manicured grass in his $1,000 shoes, looking at the woman who lived in his guest house. The woman who made his world beautiful while he was busy making it orderly. "You always have an answer from the ground," Caleb said, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "The ground doesn't lie," Honey replied simply. She stood up, brushing the dirt from her knees. "Would you like some tea? I just brewed a pot of chamomile. It helps with the noise." She gestured toward the small, lit window of the guest house. It looked warm. It looked inviting. It looked like a home, unlike the stone fortress on the hill. Caleb looked at the main house, then at the guest house. He knew he should go back. He had calls to make. He had a legacy to uphold. But his feet didn't move toward the mansion. "Just for a moment," Caleb said, his voice low. "I just need a moment of quiet." He followed her onto the porch of the guest house, crossing the invisible line between his world of statecraft and her world of soil. He didn't know it yet, but as he stepped into the humble warmth, he was walking into the only danger he hadn't prepared for, the danger of feeling understood. The interior of the guest house was a universe away from the high ceilings and echoing hallways of the main mansion. Here, the ceilings were low, creating a sense of intimacy that felt almost illicit to a man like Caleb Sterling. The room smelled of dried sage, lemon balm, and the beeswax candles flickering on the mantel. A scent that was earthly, grounding, and completely devoid of the sterile polish of the Senate cloakrooms. Caleb sat in a worn velvet armchair that had seen better days. It was slightly frayed at the arms, but it embraced him in a way his Italian leather furniture never did. He held the ceramic mug Honey had given him, the heat radiating into his cold palms. He watched her as she moved around the small kitchen, measuring loose-leaf tea with the same precision she used to prune the prize-winning roses. She wasn't trying to impress him. She didn't rush to clear the stack of botany journals from the coffee table or hide the muddy boots by the door. She simply existed comfortable in her own space, allowing him to witness the messy, vibrant reality of her life. "You look like a stranger in your own suit," Honey observed softly, bringing the teapot to the low table between them. She sat on the rug, her legs folded beneath her, opting for the floor rather than the sofa. It was a subtle shift in elevation that placed him above her. Yet, looking down, he felt she was the one grounded, while he was merely floating untethered. "I feel like a stranger in my own skin," Caleb admitted, taking a sip of the chamomile. It was hot, floral, and soothing. "The bill we are debating, it requires me to be 3 different people to 3 different constituencies. I forget which one is actually me." "You are the one who drinks tea in a gardener's cottage," Honey said, looking up at him over the rim of her cup. "That's the only one that matters right now." Caleb looked at her. The firelight cast dancing shadows across her face, highlighting the smattering of freckles across her nose and the stray copper strands escaping her braid. He felt a sudden, terrifying urge to reach out and tuck a piece of hair behind her ear. It was a small gesture, a nothing gesture, but for a United States Senator and his employee, it was a canyon they were not supposed to cross. We wear our titles like armor, forgetting that the heart is soft tissue, easily pierced by the quietest moments. "Why do you stay here, Honey?" Caleb asked, his voice rougher than he intended. "With your talent, you could run the botanical gardens in D.C. or New York. Why stay in my backyard tending to ghosts?" Honey set her cup down. She traced the pattern on the rug with her finger, a finger that still bore a trace of soil under the nail. "Because fame is just noise, Caleb, and I prefer the quiet," she answered. "Besides, the soil here is difficult. It's clay-heavy and stubborn. But when something finally blooms in it, it's stronger because it had to fight to survive. I respect that struggle." Caleb went still. He knew she wasn't just talking about the hydrangeas. She was talking about him. She was talking about the life he had built on this stubborn, hard hill. He leaned forward, closing the physical distance between them. The air in the room seemed to thicken, charged with a static electricity that made the hair on his arm stand up. "I'm tired of the noise," Caleb whispered. It was a confession he hadn't made to anyone. "I come home to a house that echoes. I haven't had a conversation that felt real in 5 years. Until I walked down that gravel path." Honey didn't look away. "Then keep walking down the path," she said softly. "The door is unlocked." It was an invitation that terrified him. Caleb reached out. He couldn't stop himself. His hand hovered in the space between them, then landed gently on her shoulder. The wool of her sweater was rough, but the warmth beneath it was searing. Honey stiffened slightly, then relaxed into his touch. For a heartbeat, they were just a man and a woman in a warm room, the rest of the world falling away. Then a harsh, digital buzzing shattered the silence. Caleb flinched as if he had been burned, pulling his hand back instantly. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. The screen lit up the dim room with a cold blue glare. "Chief of Staff, urgent." Caleb stared at the glowing screen. For a fleeting second, a look of pure exhaustion crossed his face. His thumb hovered over the red decline button. He looked at Honey, bathed in the soft firelight, and then back at the demanding light of the phone. He wanted to throw the device into the fire. He wanted to choose the quiet, but the vibration in his hand was relentless, a leash he couldn't untie. The spell broke. The warmth evaporated, replaced instantly by the cold draft of duty. Caleb's jaw tightened. The mask of a senator slid back into place, heavy and suffocating. "I have to take this," he said. His voice flat, the intimacy gone as if it had never existed. He stood up, towering over her again, restoring the distance that kept them safe and lonely. "Of course," Honey said, standing up as well. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold without the proximity of his attention. "The world doesn't stop just because the tea is hot." Caleb looked at her, regret flashing in his eyes, a brief, painful flicker before the iron shutters of his discipline slammed down. "It's the prep for the Autumn Gala," he explained, checking his watch. "I have to review the guest list. I have to be Senator Sterling again." He walked to the door, his hand on the brass knob. He paused, looking back at the woman standing in the center of the cozy, cluttered room that felt more like home than his mansion ever would. "Honey," he said, and the use of her name felt like a secret he was keeping. "For the gala, the gardens need to be perfect. The press will be there." "They will be, Senator," she replied, her voice steady but her eyes sad. "I'll make sure the background is flawless so the foreground can shine." Caleb nodded, a sharp, professional gesture, and walked out into the cold night. Honey watched the door close, realizing that the most dangerous weed in her garden wasn't a plant. It was the hope that a man made of stone could ever truly put down roots in her soft, messy earth. The night of the Autumn Gala arrived, draping the Sterling estate in a facade of shimmering perfection. Honey had spent the last 48 hours on her knees, ensuring that every chrysanthemum was deadhead and every boxwood hedge aligned with mathematical precision. She had transformed the cold, imposing grounds into a living tapestry of amber and gold, a stage set for a play she wasn't cast in. She stood now in the deep shadow of a massive oak tree near the edge of a terrace. Dressed in her best dress, a simple, forest green silk she had bought on sale 3 years ago. It was elegant, but compared to the sweeping designer gowns of the senator's guests, it was a whisper in a room full of shouts. She wasn't a guest. She was staff. She was there to ensure a fallen branch didn't trip a donor or a wilted bloom didn't offend a diplomat. From her vantage point, she watched Caleb. He was in his element. Or perhaps he was in his cage. He moved through the crowd on the terrace with the practiced ease of a man who had been shaking hands since birth. He looked devastatingly handsome in his tuxedo, a prince of the Republic holding court. But Honey saw the tension in his jaw. She saw the way his eyes darted toward the gardens, toward the darkness, looking for an escape he couldn't take. Tonight, the political sharks were circling. The bill Caleb was sponsoring was controversial, and he needed the support of the wealthy elite gathered on his lawn. At his side stood Vanessa Thorpe, the daughter of the party's chairman. She was everything Honey was not: polished, ambitious, and bred for the spotlight. It was a choreography of power, executed without a single misstep. Honey felt a cold ache settle in her chest. The tea in the cottage, the warmth of his hand on her shoulder, the confession of loneliness. It all felt like a fever dream now. Here, under the floodlights, the hierarchy was absolute. We stand just outside the light, convincing ourselves that the shadows are enough until the moment they freeze us. Then, the conversation drifted. Honey was checking a hidden hydration line near the terrace railing when she heard voices drift over the stone balustrade. It was Caleb, Vanessa, and a prominent political journalist known for his jagged questions. "Senator," the journalist drawled, swirling his scotch, "there are rumors circulating in D.C. that you've been spending a lot of time alone on the estate. Some say you found a muse in the gardens. A mystery woman living in the guest house." Honey froze. Her hand tightened on the cold copper pipe. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Vanessa laughed, a sharp, tinkling sound like breaking glass. "Oh, please. Caleb isn't the type to hide a romance in the shrubbery. That's absurd. Tell him, Caleb." Caleb paused. Honey watched his profile through the leaves. She saw the calculation happen in real time. He looked at the journalist, whose pen was poised. He knew that a rumor of an affair with his gardener would be painted as scandalous, unstable beneath him. It would jeopardize the bill. He had to kill the story. To save the legacy, he had to sacrifice the truth. "There is no mystery," Caleb said. His voice was steady, projected, the voice of a senator. "The woman in the guest house is my horticulturist. She is an employee. Nothing more. Nothing more." The words were efficient. They were necessary. And they were a lie that cut deeper than any blade. "She is a talented member of the staff," Caleb continued, his tone dismissing the topic with brutal finality. "I keep her on because the estate requires significant upkeep. It's purely an asset maintenance issue, not a personal interest. My focus, as always, is on the future of the state." "Well said." The journalist nodded, satisfied. "Asset maintenance. That sounds much more like the Caleb Sterling we know." Honey backed away. She felt as if she had been slapped. Asset maintenance. That was what their connection was reduced to. The intimacy, the understanding, the way he had looked at her like she was the only real thing in his world. It was all just maintenance. He had pruned her out of his life to keep the picture perfect. She turned and ran. She didn't run fast. She ran quietly, disappearing into the shadows of the hedges she had planted. She fled down the gravel path, the sound of the gala fading into a dull roar behind her. Tears blinded her, hot and stinging, blurring the carefully curated beauty of the night. She reached the guest house, fumbling for her keys, her hands shaking so hard she dropped them in the dirt. "Honey!" The voice came from behind her. It was breathless, desperate. She spun around. Caleb was there. He had followed her. He had left the donors, the journalist, and Vanessa, and he had chased her into the dark. "I saw you," Caleb gasped, stopping a few feet away. His tuxedo was immaculate, but his eyes were wild. "I saw you by the railing." "You heard." "I heard," Honey whispered, her voice cracking. "I heard that I am purely an asset maintenance issue." "I had to say it," Caleb pleaded, stepping closer, reaching out. "They were cornering me. If they think I'm involved with someone who isn't suitable, they will destroy you. They will dig into your life, harass you, mock you. I was protecting you, protecting me." Honey laughed, a broken, watery sound. Is that what you call it? You didn't protect me, Caleb. You denied me. You looked at the world, and you told them I was nothing. And the worst part is, I believed you. Honey, please, Caleb said, his voice raw. It's a game. It's just words. It's not a game to me, she shouted, the anger finally breaking through the hurt. This is my life. I am a person, Caleb. Not a dirty little secret you keep in the guest house to make you feel human when the lights go out. She picked up her keys from the dirt. She looked at him, and for the first time, she didn't look at him with understanding. She looked at him with disappointment. You said you wanted the roots to go deep, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. But you're just like the rest of them. You only want the flower when it looks good in a vase. You don't want the dirt that comes with it. I'm leaving, Caleb. What? Caleb froze. The color drained from his face. You can't. The contract. I don't care about the contract, she interrupted. I'm giving my notice. I'll be gone by morning. You can't, Caleb whispered, the panic setting in. This is your home. No, Honey said, stepping into the darkness of the cottage and turning back to face him one last time. This is your property, and I'm just the maintenance. She slammed the door. The sound echoed through the silent garden, a final, definitive barrier. Caleb stood alone on the porch, realizing that he had won the political argument, but he had just lost the only vote that mattered. The morning after the gala, the Sterling estate looked like the aftermath of a battle. The lawn was littered with discarded champagne flutes and crushed napkins. But the real devastation was happening at the bottom of the hill. Honey's old pickup truck was idling in the driveway of the guest house. The bed was loaded with boxes. She wasn't taking everything. She was leaving the furniture, the curtains she had sewn, and the garden she had resurrected from the dead. She couldn't take the roots with her, so she had to sever them. She stood by the truck door, shivering in the damp morning air. She took one last look at the main house. It stood silent and imposing on the ridge. She wasn't leaving because she didn't love him. She was leaving because she loved herself enough not to be an anecdote in a senator's biography. She reached for the door handle. Stop! The shout tore through the mist. Caleb was running down the gravel path. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing wrinkled dress slacks and a white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his feet jammed into loafers without socks. He looked frantic, undone. A man who had woken up in a nightmare and was trying to run his way out of it. Honey froze. She didn't turn off the engine. The truck rumbled beneath her hand, a vibration of escape. Caleb reached the driveway, his chest heaving. He put his hand on the hood of her truck, as if his physical weight alone could anchor her to the property. You can't just drive away, he gasped, his eyes pleading. Not like this. I gave my notice, Senator, Honey said, her voice hollow. It's effective immediately. The keys are on the kitchen table. Stop calling me that. Caleb snapped, moving around to face her. Stop hiding behind the title. You're doing exactly what you accused me of doing. I am protecting myself, Honey countered, her eyes flashing with a cold fire. You made it very clear last night where the lines are drawn. I'm just staying on my side of them. Outside the gate. I lied. Caleb shouted. The confession hung in the damp air, startling a flock of crows from the oak tree. He stepped closer, ignoring the exhaust fumes, ignoring the mud splashing onto his trousers. I lied to the press. I lied to Vanessa. Do you want to know why? Because I'm a liability, Honey said flatly. No. Caleb grabbed her shoulders. His grip was desperate, shaking. Because you were the only clean thing in my life, and I was terrified that if I claimed you, I would dirty you. Honey stopped. She looked up at him, seeing the raw, unvarnished terror in his eyes. It wasn't arrogance she saw there. It was trauma. My wife didn't die of a heart attack. Honey, Caleb choked out, the secret spilling out like blood. It was the stress, the cameras, the scrutiny. It ate her alive. He stepped closer, his voice breaking. I watched her wither right in front of me. She couldn't survive the climate of my ambition. And when I saw those reporters looking at you last night, I didn't see a scandal. I saw a target. He grabbed her hand, not gently but desperately. I made you small to keep you safe. I thought if I called you staff, they would look away. I wasn't ashamed of you, honey. God help me. I was terrified for you. I wanted to keep you in the guest house because that was the only place I knew you could stay whole. Honey stared at him. The engine of the truck rumbled on, but the anger in her chest began to fracture. She saw the twisted logic of his love. He hadn't pushed her away because she wasn't enough. He had pushed her away because he thought he was too much. She stepped away from the truck door. She walked up to him, stopping inches from his chest. You don't get to decide what I can survive, Caleb, she said softly. I can't lose you, he whispered, but I can't ask you to stay and be destroyed. Look at me, Honey commanded. She took his face in her rough, gardener's hands. I work with soil. I work with manure and rot and frost. Do you think a few reporters scare me? Do you think I'm as fragile as a hothouse orchid? Caleb looked at her. He felt the calluses on her palms, the strength in her fingers. He realized he had misjudged her completely. She wasn't delicate. She was enduring. I'm not your late wife, Honey said firmly. And I'm not a secret to be kept in a cottage. I can handle the weeds, Caleb, but I won't handle the lies. Caleb closed his eyes and leaned into her touch. The choice was terrifying, but for the first time, it was clear. The legacy was cold stone. She was living earth. Turn off the truck, Caleb whispered. It wasn't a command. It was a plea. Honey looked at him for a long moment, her hand hovering over the key. She didn't move yet. If I turn this engine off, Caleb, she said, her voice trembling but firm, I am never going back into the shadows. If we do this, we do it in the light, no matter who watches. Can you promise me that? Caleb didn't hesitate this time. He looked straight into her eyes. I promise. No more walls. Satisfied, Honey reached into the open window and turned the key. The engine died. Silence rushed back into the garden, but it wasn't the empty silence of the mansion. It was the sound of a seed cracking open in the dark, preparing to push through the surface. The silence that followed the death of the truck engine was not empty. It was heavy with the weight of a promise kept. The mist curled around the tires, damp and clinging, but for the first time in 5 years, the air between Caleb Sterling and Honey didn't feel thin. It felt breathable. Caleb didn't kiss her. Not yet. The moment was too fragile for grand gestures. Instead, he walked to the back of the pickup truck. He lowered the tailgate with a metallic clang that echoed through the quiet estate. He reached inside and lifted a heavy cardboard box filled with botany textbooks and dried herbs. Caleb, Honey whispered, stepping away from the cab. What are you doing? I'm moving you in, he said, adjusting his grip on the box. He looked at the guest house, the safe, hidden container he had tried to keep her in, and then he turned his eyes up the hill toward the Georgian mansion that loomed like a fortress. But not back in there. You don't live in the guest house anymore. Honey watched him. She saw the mud on his dress shoes. She saw the way his white shirt was damp with the morning fog. He wasn't the senator managing a crisis. He was a man carrying the weight of the woman he loved, refusing to let her carry it alone. It's a long walk up that hill, Honey warned, her voice trembling slightly. And the house, it's cold, Caleb. It echoes. Then we will fill it, Caleb replied, looking at her with an intensity that burned through the gray morning. We'll fill it with dirt and basil and those ugly boots of yours. We'll make it loud. I don't care about the echoes anymore. They walked up the gravel path together. Honey carried a crate of clay pots. Caleb carried her books. It was a strange, quiet procession, the dismantling of a secret and the beginning of a life. The days that followed were not a fairy tale. The Heritage Preservation Act passed, But Caleb's approval ratings took a hit when the society pages stopped receiving invitations to the Sterling estate. Vanessa Thorpe gave a scathing interview about unfocused leadership. The political sharks circled, sensing blood in the water. But Caleb didn't bleed. For the first time in his career, he simply didn't care. He would come home from D.C., the noise of the Capitol buzzing in his head like a swarm of angry wasps, and he would walk through the front door of the mansion. The marble foyer, which used to smell of lemon polish and loneliness, now smelled of roasting rosemary and damp earth. Honey had moved her propagation station into the sunroom. There were trays of seedlings resting on the antique mahogany tables. There were muddy footprints on the Persian rugs. It wasn't perfect. It was messy. And it was the only time Caleb felt his heart beat at a normal rhythm. Winter eventually descended on Virginia, wrapping the estate in a blanket of white silence. On a Tuesday evening in January, the kind of night that used to drive Caleb to stay late at the office just to avoid the quiet, he sat in the library. The fire was roaring. He wasn't reading a bill. He was watching Honey sketch a new layout for the perennial border. She looked up, catching his gaze. "You're staring again, Senator," she teased gently. "I'm memorizing," he corrected. He stood up and walked over to her, sitting on the arm of her chair. He took her hand, the hand that was still rough, still strong, still everything he wasn't. "I'm trying to remember why I thought I could ever live without this." "Fear," Honey answered simply. "You were afraid the frost would kill the roots." "I was afraid of the exposure," Caleb admitted. He looked out the window at the snow-covered grounds. "I spent my whole life believing that strength meant standing alone, untouchable, like a monument. But monuments are cold, Honey. And they're dead." He leaned down and kissed her. It was a slow, deliberate kiss, tasting of chamomile and peace. It was the kiss of a man who had finally resigned from the exhausting job of being perfect. We build walls to protect our legacy, never realizing that the wall also blocks out the sun, and without the sun, nothing can truly grow. The leitmotif had shifted. He had torn down the wall, not with a sledgehammer, but with a simple refusal to hide. He had lost the approval of the people who only loved his title, but he had gained the devotion of the woman who loved his soul. Spring arrived late that year, but when it came, it was riotous. The tulips Honey had planted in the first block, the ones she had rushed to get into the ground before the frost, erupted in a blaze of color along the guest house path. But no one lived in the guest house anymore. It stood empty, a monument to a past life. One morning, a photographer from the Post arrived to take pictures for a profile on Caleb's re-election campaign. The handler suggested they pose in the library, surrounded by leather-bound books, to project authority. "No," Caleb said, loosening his tie. "We'll do it in the garden." He led them outside. He didn't stand alone in front of a pillar. He stood next to Honey. She wasn't wearing a gown. She was wearing her oatmeal sweater and her work boots, holding a trowel. She tried to step out of the frame, conditioned by years of invisibility. Caleb caught her hand. He pulled her back into the center of the shot. He didn't look at the camera. He looked at her. "Stay," he whispered, loud enough for the microphone to catch. "This is the only part of the estate that matters." The photo that ran on the Sunday cover didn't show a stoic senator protecting his power. It showed a man holding onto a woman's dirty hand as if it were a lifeline. It wasn't the image his advisors wanted, but it was the truth. Caleb Sterling had spent 40 years trying to be a house that everyone admired from the street. But in the end, he realized he didn't want to be a mansion. He just wanted to be the soil where she could plant her life. He had spent a lifetime governing the state, never suspecting that the only territory he ever truly needed to conquer was the distance between the main house and the woman who lived in the garden.